Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Perry Johnson Photography. Today I'm sitting down with internationally renowned artist Miles Lowry, who works across multiple disciplines, including painting, sculpture, film, music, photography, dance, and there's probably others. He's also authored 2 books, and I was lucky enough to sit down and talk to him about his process and what it means to be an artist. So without further ado, here is my interview with the amazing Miles Lowry. When did you know that you wanted to become an artist full-time? Is that something that you fell into? Or was it premeditated from an early age, like I want to do that?
I don't think I knew right away that I wanted to do that. I knew I liked making art. But the process, I think when I was younger, I didn't really get into it until I was about 14. I didn't make a lot of art when I was a child. To me it was very secret. Like making art was something you did secretly and you didn't show anybody. So you'd make your drawing or whatever, but it was your personal thing. It wasn't something, And its purpose was not to show. That changed, of course, over time. But originally that I would do drawings just to kind of contain whatever was in my mind somehow.
There was an energy that you had that you needed to get to.
Maybe more like images that I couldn't get out of my head, and I didn't know how to express them, and so I would try drawing them, and I'd come up with something. But it didn't matter what it looked like because I wasn't showing it to anybody. But I think later, when I started to draw for school or something like that, and people would notice it, it became a completely different experience for me. I thought, oh, this is about communication to the world, not just in my own brain. Right. And so that changed.
So did that change how your process?
It did a bit, yeah. It meant that I had to communicate more, that it couldn't be so vague. Because, in your own head, you can look at something and you can have a conversation that might be very vague if you were to say it out loud to someone else, but to you, you know the inner truth of it. But to try and express that outwardly for people to maybe communicate back, that's a whole different thing. But that's what was so exciting, the shift.
So how did you gauge then whether or not you were being, I guess, true to yourself while still being efficient with your communication in regards to your art? Like how are you able to gauge that, or how did you learn to gauge that?
That's a good question. I think the thing is it's a lot of work. So you don't just make something without it meaning something to you. Like if it's going to take you a lot of time and effort, you're not going to just flip it off and see what happens. I was much more interested in creating these images. I wasn't even very good at the beginning. I was just really just learning. But the problem is I had these images, but I did not know how to paint them. I just knew that I had to try. And so I painted very differently in my early days because I just didn't have the skills. And I liked what was happening and people responded to it. And I think that was the big thing for me, is that it actually opened up a line of communication I didn't have before.
Right.
And I was very private. I really wanted to be a musician, but I didn't have the personality for that. I was much more likely to spend time by myself creating something and then share it, whereas a musician has to stand in front of people. I wasn't very good at that.
Yeah, it's that age-old dilemma that a lot of musicians face when they're introverts.
Terrible.
You have to
Yeah.
reconcile that and the stage fright and all. I used to get really bad stage fright.
Yeah. No, it's easy to happen. It can happen with art too. I mean, the best way to look at art is privately, I think. You just want to be by yourself and having an experience without anyone around. Well, that hardly ever happens. Usually you're in a public space or whatever. And so, you feel that you're getting an experience, but I don't think you really are getting as big an experience as you could as if you had that private time. So I love to go into museums when nobody's there.
Right.
And just be there.
That's what I was going to ask you next. I mean, if you're commissioned to create something, are you in a different headspace than if you're just doing it for yourself and it's something that maybe ends up as part of a collections?
Yeah, it changes a bit, for sure. Because I do different kinds of work and different kinds of commissions. Some of them are very personal, they're the best, where you really are working with somebody to create something that has already an inherent meaning. Sometimes, like if I'm doing something, say for a book cover or some kind of publication, where I'm interpreting a text and trying to make a cover that the author is going to like, because I'm a writer, so I know how important that is. Because if you don't like your book cover, it's kind of a disaster. Because you spent 10 years writing your novel and you hate the cover, it's bad. Yeah. So you really want to please the project, but mostly you have to I go into the text, and I know if I can do it. If I can't do it, I will say no. But because I go into the text and I go through the process, and images come to me. Whether they're in the book or not, they just come to me. And I know, okay, I can do this. And then I create the image, or I might already have it. Sometimes I've already created an image that's perfect, or I have to create it from scratch. But yeah, it really makes a difference. The work I do for myself, that is just my own work, sometimes finds its way into the public, but it's not because of the public.
Right.
It's not because it's being shown. It's because I've given myself permission to make art that is my own exploration or something like that.
The process of being inspired how do you describe that? Like, where does that come from? If you were to tell somebody I get inspired, what is the source of that? Like, what is your relationship with the source of your inspiration?
That's a good question. It changes. I wish I could give you one answer, but I think when I was younger, I used to have this idea that it was like a vision. That I was having a vision of some sort, which sounds very pretentious or something, but it feels like that. It feels like something has hit you that you can't ignore.
Right.
And it takes over, it's obsession. It becomes an obsession. I think a lot of artists experience this sense of obsession where they just don't have a choice. Like, they'll do anything to get to that point where they can express the obsession. And so that's a good word, I think, because it does feel like that. I think a lot of times I will put myself in a place, like I will go to a place, say a physical place, like travel, and with the intention of just being open to whatever happens, without a plan, but with all the right materials. So it's like you've got your camera, but you don't know what you're going to shoot. Right. So I've got all everything together. And so it usually happens, again, it comes through some kind of moment or episode or glimmer of connection. And you feel like you want to express it and see if it mirrors back to you what you were feeling. And so it's kind of this communication you have with yourself in another language,
right,
which is the visual part of things, rather than what the head is doing, which is mostly words. You're talking to yourself going, wow, that was amazing. How do I make that something I can experience or share? Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's throwing paint.
Mm-hmm. And you're getting pretty good at throwing paint.
Good at throwing paint,
yeah.
After all these years, yeah. And I worked for years I worked quite realistically, in that I did a lot of drawing and a lot of copying of photographs and all the things that it took me to feel like I had a handle on the image. And then now I'm able to work not from the image originally. Like, I'll work from the impulse and then the image will come out of it. Oh. I used to work the other way around. Right. So, I play back and forth. And I did work as an illustrator, where you were being told what to do, which is really interesting. She's looking left, her eyes are blue. These are book cover type things. Right. There's a dog in the background. And so you're really stuck having to say what you're told, do what you're told. But I don't tend to work that way anymore. I tend to have a lot more freedom to, create what I'm really, truly interested in creating.
Even when you're doing the book covers? More so. So you're given a lot of latitude for interpretation based on what the writers... Yeah.
I think, the writer tends to not have much say. It's usually the publisher.
Oh.
I just
I
like
didn't know that.
I just like to please the writer,
Right.
and I try to please both, obviously. But yeah, the writer often has no choice whatsoever, which is interesting.
Well, that explains all the bad book covers out there.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes
And there's
perfect
some.
sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting process. I love it. I love it because it's it's a thing that can be kind of it's very important because you're holding this book for a while and you see it every day. So and I have this experience. If I don't like the cover, I don't buy the book.
Yeah.
I'll look for another version.
I'm like that too.
Yeah. So it means it matters.
I am judging the damn book by its
It
cover.
matters. I
Yeah.
think it totally matters. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a spiritual connection to?
To making art,
Yeah.
I would say yes. It's such a loaded subject that
Right.
it's really interesting, and there's no way around it. I've always researched and went into situations where I could experience and challenge the idea of spirituality and what it means and how to define it, and so I'm very interested in that. The funny thing I think that has happened is that over time, the art process has kind of become the spiritual process.
Oh.
Weirdly, I didn't expect that. Because normally you think you have a belief and then your art expresses it. Well, the two have become so entwined for me that it's very hard for me to define a spiritual practice. I'm not a Buddhist and I'm not a Christian and I'm not a pagan and I haven't really been able to say that I'm any of those things, but all of those things are interesting to me.
So are we being connected with our own like humanity, or are we being connected to our own divinity?
Good question, because those things are related. I think our own sense of divinity, like our place in the whole system of what is sacred, maybe, changes according to a lot of things that happen to us. We might really experience, abstract art, say, at one time as being the thing that takes us out of ourselves and gives us a sense of divinity. And other times we might look at a little figure that's been carved in such a way that it feels like part of yourself, like some part of your life experience or someone and it just hits. I try to be quite open when I'm looking at art. I don't have one kind of art that I like. I like a lot of different kinds of art. It's like music. I'm just very open to all kinds of expression. I have preferences, and that changes. When I look back 20 years ago, I was interested in different kinds of art than I am now. I was making different art.
Right.
And
So this is kind of church for you in a way.
yeah, it's forest and chapel.
Right.
For me. Like I'm very nature based. Like my work is about the human body. It's about nature, and mostly, and our connection to all of those things and how the rest of the world deals with it. The body, of course, is a very strong subject because it's what we are,
Yeah.
as opposed to who we are. It's what we are. We're made of it. And we have a lot of feelings. Everyone's got feelings about the body as a subject. And even now, like thousands of years into the process of expressing art of the body, we're very, very sensitive about it. It's interesting how sensitive we are.
And we continue to be fascinated by it.
Yeah, it's endless.
Yeah.
It's endless. It's one of those interesting things that, like, for me, it covers a lot of territory.
Right.
And nature, the landscape, whatever that is the other part of it. It's the other big thing. There's who we are and what we are, and then there's where we are and what's going on and how does that connect. And for me, the way those things connect and become each other is like a kind of spirituality.
Right.
So if I was to define it, it would kind of be in that way.
Yeah. So it's connection to the divine through as a human, the human experience of connecting to the divine by way of nature then.
That's a strong impulse.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, for me.
And that's actually reflected in the way that you create art, because a lot of your painting is very nature-based, but your sculpture is all form. And so it's interesting how you can see that, just what you're describing, manifesting in your art.
Well, they slowly have become more like each other.
Right.
The paintings, the sculptures and the paintings are one thing. The sculptures have are both. They're both painting and sculpture because I'm painting on top of these castings.
Right.
And so I'm bringing my painting into the sculpture. I used to be interested in ceramics. I used to make ceramics, and I tried that whole process of glazing and everything. I did quite a few pieces that way for years, but I could not create the work that I create now that way.
Right.
And when I finally realized that it wasn't going to work, I had to move on. A whole another thing opened up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how you work is a big part. It's a big part of what happens to you as a creative person. If you're struggling constantly, like I also wanted to be a stone carver at one point, except I realized that I would be hitting rocks for a long time. And I thought, I don't think I want to do that. And I don't want to breathe all that dust either. Yeah. So, you have to figure it out. For me, it was more about ideas than it was about methods. And the methods came from the ideas, and they started blending together. And now I'd like to travel when I work. So I work with paper that I can take around the world anywhere. And it's light and it's durable. I can fold it up. It's mulberry paper. It's got a really classic quality. And then I can bring it back to the studio and mount it. And so it's freed me to work anywhere.
Just something that you mentioned, the letting go of the one sculpture technique. Did you find that really painful?
I think it was a transition that took a long time because I was doing both for a while.
Yeah.
And then I just finally realized I don't want to fire kilns. I don't want to deal with any of that.
Yeah.
I started working with paper, and it was really more fiber than paper. It's kind of slightly different. And my painterly instinct came out, and then it was a done deal.
Oh, okay.
So once I'd realized I had so much more, control over that part, I didn't worry as much about the other thing. Because the paper casting process is not as plastique as the molding of clay.
Right.
But it's all I needed. It's all I wanted. I didn't really want to do the classical sculpting thing. I tried it, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't really what I was expressing. I wanted to somehow move a step in further and see what happened when I took the classical form, and instead of making classical forms, copying, I started casting people. And it changed, again, actually having a real human being, a likeness of a human being in a 3D form, there's a real person there. Yeah. And no matter how you paint it or change it, the real person doesn't go away. They're always there. And so behind every single piece is a real person. So I'm not making stuff up. I used to be much more into fantasy and that sort of thing. And now I find the real world is plenty. Yeah. I find that some of the most beautiful things I've painted are not imaginary. They exist, and I've seen them. Right. And I enjoy that process of recalling a place or a person through the work.
Why is art important?
Well, I think...
Why do we need it?
I think we all know how important it is, instinctively. We don't always know how to express that, but we know when something has a kind of effect on us.
Even if it's negative?
Even if it's negative, and boy, sometimes it is, But people, because I've shown work publicly, I've been able to observe people's response, sometimes secretly. Like I remember showing at Artropolis in Vancouver, and I had 5 figures. They were all male figures, quite naked, on the wall. They were rusty-looking things. They looked like they'd been through a lot. And I remember watching people approach them. I'd go off somewhere and I'd look back and I'd see what do they do? Do they look for 2 minutes and walk away? Do they touch them? Anyway, I was watching this process, and a woman walked up and she was looking around and she kissed one on the mouth. And I thought, why would someone do that in a public space? Like, what would be so what was that impulse? Now, I wanted to ask her. I did not. I was too embarrassed myself. I thought, oh my God, someone just kissed my art. Why do people respond to art? Because I think what's important is that we do respond to it. We respond to that book cover, we respond to the album cover, we respond to the advertisement on the side of a bus. Somebody photographed that, somebody designed that. It's all around us. It's in our culture, so much that we actually forget that's even there. And then something will hit us, something completely from left field and you fall in love. I always think of looking at art as an extension of falling in love. When people ask me, how do you survive? I say, well, one person has to fall in love with one piece at a time. And it works. That's all it really has to happen. You can't please everybody because that never happens. It just doesn't. And artists amongst themselves have different ideas of what's okay because trends happen, right? And all of that, you can look throughout history of all these trends and stuff. So I kind of take the trends less seriously because you can see how they come and go but the main thing that happens is people fall in love with what they see. Even if they hate it, even if it bothers them, some part of them goes, this is important.
So that woman fell in love with that piece of art.
Something happened that she felt inclined to do something that maybe she'd never done before. Maybe she's an art kisser, who knows? But you never know. Like something happened to her and no, she didn't think anyone saw her because she'd waited. So she wasn't doing it to show off. She was doing it for a very personal reason. And something about that piece inspired her. I've had people break down and cry, which is another bizarre experience. Not because the artwork was about something sad, but because something happens to you when you look at art that might be beyond your expectation.
If you're interested in seeing more of my interviews with artists, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next episode of Perry Johnson Photography. Thanks for watching.